Daylight lasts longer, the sun seems brighter, green things are sprouting, and flowers are blooming, birds are chirping again, and I just love it. New life. It refreshes my soul, especially after the long, dark, and dreary winter. Spring makes me feel alive again. It makes things seem new again, and new life rises forth from the earth, and life's potential seems so much clearer and promising in the spring. Now, many of you know that I'm an archivist at the John E. Appleseed Museum, and I started doing archival work several years ago at the Piatt Castles in West Liberty, Ohio. Now, the Piatt family once upon a time did live in Cincinnati, so you might be familiar with them. There's Piatt Park, and I think one of the Piatts made the first fire department here in Cincinnati. So they eventually moved up to Logan County in the 1820s at some point.
Robbin, can you maybe aim toward the microphone just to hear? Or we can move it a little bit.
A little bit. Okay. Part of what I got to do was transcribe historical documents. And in the beginning, it was mostly Piatt family correspondence, letters to each other. The really cool thing is for generations, the family would come back and forth living there. So they had both sides of the correspondence between the people. So at one time I was transcribing some letters that were dated during the Civil War era in the 1860s. And one letter in particular really moved me. It really struck me in my head and my heart. It caused me to go down the proverbial rabbit hole, doing further and unnecessary research. It was a letter from Thomas Worthington Jr. to his niece Maggie. Now, Thomas fought in the battle at Shiloh, and he writes home about it. Now, for you Ohio history buffs, Thomas's father was also named Thomas Worthington Sr., and he was Ohio's 6th governor. And he lived in Edina in Chillicothe, which was the first state capital. So the Piatt family married into the Worthington family in 2 different generations. So this is how the Piatts came to have this letter from Mr. Worthington. Mr. Worthington wrote a poem to his niece, who was married to Abram Piatt at the time, and he was the builder of one of the castles in West Liberty, and I worked there. The poem is titled Shiloh, the Great Battle. And I would like to read 2 of the stanzas. There were 5, but I had a hard time deciphering some of the words, so I put blanks in there, so I might say blank, and that just means I couldn't make out the word. And this is just to give you an idea of the tone of what this letter was about. So he writes, "Who shall answer for Shiloh? 1,000 to 1, unworthy of blank, in the light of the sun. The fell war of freedom, oppression of slaves, let their memories sink in their honorable graves. And ye who are weeping, oh, 'twas not in vain that the blood of your loved ones was shed like the rain." So that kind of gives you a sense of the mood of the letter. At the end of this poem, he included a quote and then a short letter to his niece. The quote says, "Beautiful azaleas, wild honeysuckle abound in this bloody field. And said the Lord unto Cain, the voice of thy brother's blood crieth unto me from the ground." The quote is from Genesis 4, chapter 4, verse 10. And it is a story of when Cain killed his brother Abel. This really hit me when I read this letter. The combination of mentioning the flowers and then that scripture, it made me think of Ukraine first, as that war had just begun at the time that I was transcribing this letter. And then I started thinking of all the other wars since the Civil War and all the violent crimes that happen daily everywhere. Today, we are afraid of the war that has just recently started in Iran. Ukraine still battles on, and even in our own country, civil unrest seems to always be on the periphery. To think of the blood of all the slain people everywhere from all times crying up to God from the earth. It is a powerful vision to me of humanity's selfishness, greed, and disassociation with our brothers and sisters all across the globe. Such carelessness with life. Mr. Worthington also writes that he is sending her some azalea blooms. How curious, I thought. That sounded poignant and morbid at the same time. How could one possibly notice and remember flowers during a time of worst battles during the Civil War? That juxtaposition of beauty and horror seemed surreal to me. It reminded me of that story of when the Titanic was sinking and the band played on as long as they could. I think that image is very hauntingly beautiful in a peculiar sort of way, which is how this letter struck me from Mr. Worthington. Also on the internet, at the beginning of the Ukraine war, I saw a woman go into her bombed out home in Ukraine to try to salvage anything she could. She had a baby grand piano in her home still intact. The windows, the walls, the doors were all destroyed all around it. She got up to her piano and wiped the debris off, sat down and played a classical piece of music one last time amidst all this rubble before she had to leave for good. As I went down that rabbit hole, I found online other stories from the soldiers that were there at Shiloh. One soldier said that he and another comrade had picked violets and tucked them under their caps for good luck. Only one of them survived. Another story I found said that there was a peach orchard at Shiloh in full bloom. The battle, which took place over 2 days, April 6th and 7th of 1862, it took place under that peach orchard on the first day. The bullets at times hitting the trees, causing the blossoms to fall like snow. What a beautiful image, I think, to see blossoms falling like snow, until you think about the bloodshed taking place underneath of it all. This happened during Lent. Easter was just 2 weeks away that year from Shiloh. I found that out down that rabbit hole too. So again, I'm thinking about these visuals of something so profoundly beautiful in the midst of events that are so painful and ugly. What does that mean? What did it all mean during the week of Holy Week, when Jesus was arrested and went through the trials and traumas that he went through before he was crucified? Reverend Nadia Bowles-Weber writes, God simply keeps reaching down into the dirt of our humanity, resurrecting us from the graves we dig for ourselves through our violence, our lies, our selfishness, our arrogance, and our addictions. And God keeps loving us back to life over and over. Perhaps the flowers are God's way of showing us that he still loves us, no matter what we do. We know that the divine is in all things everywhere. Everything in nature corresponds to things in the spirit world, as Swedenborg teaches us. Perhaps the flowers and other things of beauty are there to remind us that God is still with us, always with us, no matter what we do to each other, offering us another choice, another chance to do right. As we go through Lent, we reflect on our inner spiritual growth, and we have the opportunity to let go of those things that would lead us away from love, away from God. This is part of our regeneration process. Spring is the season of resurrection. As new life springs forth from the cold darkness in the winter of the winter soil, we humans also experience the cold darkness and then the renewal of life. With the changing seasons of death and rebirth, spring reminds us that death and resurrection are part of the natural order of the cosmos. And we experience it in many ways every day, not just once, but over and over. Hope and divine promise show up in times of sadness and tragedy. If we pay attention to the small moments of beauty and light that reveal themselves to us, even in the darkest of times. But why does God even allow bad things to happen? Why does there have to be so much suffering? Swedenborg teaches us that we have to experience the contrast of good versus evil. to be able to know the difference, and to have the willingness to choose love and goodness. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil was in the very same Garden of Eden as the tree of life. The contrast was put there from the beginning. As it turns out, blossom corresponds with the second stage of the rebirth of man. It is all part of the regeneration process. That moment when we begin thinking about heaven and God in regard to the choices that we make in life. It is at this time that transformation begins taking place within us, moving us away from self-love to a deeper understanding of faith and charity. We begin to see the goodness in the world and start to desire to act accordingly, which will lead us to a state of reformation. Suffering is a part of life, as we know. In the 12-step program, they say you must hit rock bottom before you can learn to let go and let God. In other words, it isn't until you hit rock bottom that you are willing to surrender to something greater than yourself. Suffering is generally a time of emptiness and grief, but it can lead us to that breaking open moment when we quit resisting. That moment of surrender is when the divine spirit can enter in to lead us to elevation, to regeneration, to rebirth, and to resurrection. The suffering in life, then, is an invitation. It is a call for more. During the easy times in life, we don't usually notice the divine spark that is within and around us, or we just dismiss it. A candle in a lighted room is inconsequential to us, but in the dark, it is necessary for illumination and to help us see our way forward. In his daily message, Richard Ward writes, "The pattern of transformation is always death and resurrection, or loss and renewal. We ordinarily learn to submit and surrender to this scary pattern only when reality demands it of us as it is doing now. Christians are helped by the fact that Jesus literally submitted to it and came out more than okay. Jesus is our guide, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. Each time we surrender, each time we trust the dying, we are led to a deeper level. We are grounded for a while like an electric wire, so there is less resistance and more available energy to trust it the next time. Yet it is still invariably a leap of faith, a walk through some degree of darkness. There is something essential that we only know by dying. We really don't know what life is until we know what death is. Divine life is so big, so deep, and so indestructible that it is able to include death. We all have these resurrection moments in our lives when the light shines through to some divine truth. We are also participating in the dying and the resurrection cycle of life, as is all of nature. God is with us every step of the way. The resurrection of Jesus is much more meaningful because, like us, he too was victimized. Like us, he too was hated. The power of God is that he still gives life, even in his death, and he still loves even when he's hated. Eddie Hilsum is a Dutch author who died in a Jewish concentration camp. In July 1942, the same month that the Nazis began their first big street roundup of Jews in Amsterdam, Eddie Hilsum wrote in her diary, "I am with the hungry, with the ill-treated and the dying every day. But I am also with the jasmine and with that piece of sky beyond my window. It is a question of living life from minute to minute and taking suffering into the bargain. And it is certainly no small bargain these days. I have looked our destruction, our miserable end, which was already begun in so many small ways in our daily life, straight in the eye, and my love of life has not been diminished." As we know through Swedenborg, the story of Lent and Easter, as are all the stories in the Word, in the Bible, are a story of us, all of us. What if the Easter narrative is an invitation? which is individual, but also deeply personal to each one of us. On our journey through Lent, as we look at ourselves and the choices we make, how we see and treat others in the whole plan, we have to decide if we want to ride the tide of love, regeneration, and resurrection, despite the trials and tribulations of the world. To trust in the Lord that this life is not the end, and that there is another life in the spiritual world, which is where we come from and to where we will return. And in order to move forward, we must be willing and brave enough to look life straight in the eye with all its pain and heartache, and look for the blossoms, the music, the beauty, and all the goodness that is in the world for us, and see God smiling upon us. Amen.